Well, Ben, we've had a couple of questions from our listeners and from our viewers. And one of the questions that keep coming up is, what do we do about hyperpigmentation? And I guess I would add to that, is all hyperpigmentation coming from the same place, or are there different reasons for it?
Okay, good question. First of all, well, a couple things. First of all, when I think about hyperpigmentation and when I hear about hyperpigmentation, the first thing I always tell people is you have to distinguish between two types of pigment. One type of pigment is melanin. Melanin is a substance, very fascinating substance actually, that's electrically active. It absorbs electrical energy. It's stored in the skin, but it's also found in your brain. It's found in areas of the body that tend to have a lot of friction and a lot of, right, the nipples and the genitals. There's a lot of friction going on, and found in areas in the body where there's a lot of electrical energy. The brain and the nervous system contain melanin. And so melanin is a type of pigment that responds to electrical energy specifically, and it's, by the way, it's being used in industry to conduct electrical energy in chips and in various high-tech devices. Melanin actually is. Yes, it's a very fascinating element. In the skin, it's designed to transduce electronic energy or photonic energy that comes from the sun, and it actually gets dark. It's like almost like this chemical that in effect pulls down the shades in your skin to protect the lower levels of the skin from ultraviolet radiation. So it's like the surface of the skin pulls down the shades and the melanin gets darker in response to the sun. Very fascinating chemical reaction. However, it can happen inappropriately, and I'll tell you why it happens inappropriately in a minute, but when it happens inappropriately, we get what's called hyperpigmentation. Hyper means too much, pigmentation means you get darker. And the problem with hyperpigmentation is it occurs in blotches. So people will hyperpigment in various spots in the skin, and it'll just look a little funny. It'll look like irregular pigmentation. There's several reasons for that, which I'll tell you in a minute. But the point I want to make now is there's a second type of pigment, which is called aging pigment. And this is different from melanin. It isn't really a pigment. It's more like a cellular waste. Cell debris. Cells are constantly being broken down in the body and the materials are being recycled. But as we get older, the breakdown process occurs too fast for the recycling to kick in, and these breakdown products start to accumulate, and they can accumulate in the lower levels of the skin. Pigmentation, true pigmentation, melanin darkening occurs in the higher levels of the skin.
Okay,
the
so
kind
right
of
on
pigmentation,
the surface right there?
the surface, maybe a little bit below the surface, but what we're talking about here now is aging pigment, which is technically called lipofusin, Lipofuscin. Have you heard of this?
Yes.
Have you heard of this stuff?
Yes.
Lipofusin. That's called aging pigment, and that will show up as blotches that are deep, you can't scrub them off, you can't use a skin lightener on them. They're there forever, basically. You can kind of help drain them away a little bit, but for the most part, they're very difficult to get rid of. And sometimes, very often actually, people will confuse melanin, the kind of pigment that responds to the sun, for lipofusin. And they'll say, oh, this is sun. I better get out of the sun. I got all these sunspots. They're not sunspots. They're a sign that the body is now starting to break down and cells are dying faster than the parts can be recycled or cleared away. And it's a very serious problem because it means the body is beginning to break down. Pigmentation is serious too in a little bit because it means your pigment is oxidizing or it's rusting, so there's some issues there. But lipofusin means you're aging and your body's breaking down. It's a much more serious issue. And it will typically only happen to people as they get older, like people in their 60s or 70s. But if you're in your 40s or 50s and you're starting to get these aging spots, these not sunspots, but aging spots, lipofusin, it's pretty serious, and you want to start focusing on especially fat absorption and lymphatic drainage, because the fatty part of the body is responsible for draining out these cellular waste or cellular debris. And when you have an accumulation of cellular waste or cellular debris, it means you're not draining these things out as effectively, in addition to not recycling them as effectively. So if you're starting to get lipofusin spots, you want to use vitamin E, you want to use lymphatic drainage techniques, rebounding, maybe watching out for food intolerances because the lymph can become clogged because of foods that we're eating. It could be a sign of disease, so you want to be focusing on perhaps degenerative disease that may be either percolating underneath or maybe percolating on top if you already know about it. It's a pretty serious breakdown issue. Not as significant as hyperpigmentation, true hyperpigmentation, which is what I think you're asking about. So true hyperpigmentation is a darkening that occurs in an inconsistent, irregular fashion, not necessarily in response to the sun. And in order to understand what I mean here, we have to realize that the reaction between the sun and pigment is a kind of rusting reaction. So if you have like an iron or a nail and you put it in water, you know it'll turn rusty, right? That's a reaction between the oxygen molecules in the water, H2O. Water has element oxygen in it. The rusty nail is a reaction between the oxygen in the water and the iron. Iron is said to oxidize. A simple way of thinking about oxidation is burning. Burning is a type of oxidation. So your iron is actually burning. The water is causing a type of burning. As ironic or as interesting as that sounds, the water is burning the iron. It's oxidizing the iron. So oxidation is a kind of chemical reaction that can result in darkening. There's lots of things that can oxidize. Water, or I should say oxygen, is a classic oxidation element, hence the term oxidation oxygen. But the sun can cause something called photooxidation, which is sunlight-driven rusting. And the sun and melanin pigment, the sun will rust pigment. It will oxidize pigment. So when you get tan or when you get darker, what's happening is your melanin is rusting. It's oxidizing. It's burning. In essence, it's a very protective reaction because it's protecting the surfaces, the tissue underneath the surface. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're looking a little confused here.
Well, I'm thinking, so when we're out there sunbathing and we're tanning because we want to look darker.
Your melanin is darkening in response to the sun. It's a protective mechanism. And that darkening could be related to a rusty nail or an apple. You ever cut an apple and you leave it out? What happens to the apple?
It starts browning, oxidizing.
Oxidizing. It tans. It burns. Whatever you want to say. Even a log in a fire will turn black eventually. Yep. That oxide. Remember last week we were talking about how vitamin C will turn black over time? Again, that's oxidation. So this is all very good. You want this to happen. Okay. However, there are other things that can cause oxidation, such as estrogen, the female hormone estrogen, or derivatives of the female hormone estrogen. Incompletely processed estrogen, elements called catechol estrogens, can cause oxidation inappropriately. Birth control pills can do it. Women, when they're going through menopause, will sometimes get oxidation of their pigment as they get older.
Are those splotches that pregnant women will get?
Exactly. It's called the mask of pregnancy. Yeah. Women will get it when they're on hormone replacement pills. Anytime you mess around with your estrogen, estrogen is an oxidizing agent. It's a rusting agent. So if you're starting to get hyperpigmentation as opposed to lipofusion, I'm not talking about lipofusion here. If you're starting to get hyperpigmentation, and you're menopausal, or you're on the birth control pill, or you're on hormone replacement, you want to consider that you're not breaking down or metabolizing estrogen correctly, or you're giving yourself too much toxic estrogen, and you want to start balancing that out. And there's many ways to do that. Progesterone cream will do it, or progesterone in general will do it. Pregnenolone is a nice estrogen balancing supplement. Vitamin A is a good estrogen balancing supplement. All women on the birth control pill should be on vitamin A. Folic acid and the B complex can help protect against estrogen oxidation. That's another thing that can cause, in addition to the sun, that can cause inappropriate hyperpigmentation. Sometimes prescription drugs can do it. There's prescription drugs that can cause oxidation. One of the most interesting and underappreciated chemicals in the body that will cause oxidation is something called cortisol. In fact, melanin and cortisol are intimately related. And when your body is under some kind of stress, whether it's the stress of a degenerative disease or the stress of a psychological stress or an emotional stress, and your cortisol levels go up, if it's a stress caused by low blood sugar, a stress caused by anything really, and your cortisol levels rise, cortisol can act as an oxidizing agent and it can accelerate pigmentation. So in addition to estrogen, stress can do it, cortisol can do it. So you got estrogen can cause hyperpigmentation, you've got cortisol that can cause hyperpigmentation, you've got drugs that can cause hyperpigmentation, and then there's the digestive issue. If you're not absorbing your antioxidant nutrients from your food because you have a liver problem, or you have a gallbladder removed, or you had a hysterectomy, or you got intestinal issues, Crohn's disease, celiac disease, leaky gut syndrome, all of these can cause you to have deficiencies in antioxidant nutrients. Okay. So oxidation is causing the pigmentation. Antioxidation protects you. But if you have a gut problem, you're not going to absorb your antioxidant nutrients. Or if you're simply nutritionally deficient, you're not supplementing, or you're not having a good diet, all of those can keep you from antioxidizing, can keep you from protecting yourself from inappropriate oxidation. So oxidation is, to sum up, hyperpigmentation, or I should say pigmentation is a good thing.
Okay.
It protects you. Hyperpigmentation, or inappropriate pigmentation, because that's really what we're talking about, the wrong kind, not so much too much pigmentation as inappropriate pigmentation, can be caused, number one, by estrogen, number two, by nutritional deficiencies, which follow either not getting enough nutrients or problems with the digestive system, cortisol, which is stress hormone, or prescription drugs. And those are all elements. Did I say estrogen? Estrogen
You
can also...
did say estrogen.
Estrogen can also be a hyperpigmentation agent. So there's lots of reasons. There's lots of reasons why you'll hyperpigment, and the way you want to protect yourself is balance out your estrogen, make sure you're getting your antioxidant nutrients, relax, get rid of any stressors that are causing cortisol levels to go up, stay off of prescription drugs, and distinguish your dark spots as either pigmentation from the sun, from melanin, or lipofuscin, which is an aging pigment. If it's lipofuscin, it'll be deeper. You can tell the difference because it'll be deeper, and you won't be able to scrub it off, and hydroquinone and retinoic acid won't work. Now, we should also we should do this on another video, talk about topical protection from hyperpigmentation, because there's a lot of things you can do topically. If you go to the doctor, and I'm guilty of this myself as a pharmacist, doctors prescribe a very, very toxic substance for lightening the skin called hydroquinone, and I've made my share of hydroquinone. It's really nasty. I used to make very high concentrations of hydroquinone. I had to breathe it in the laboratory and in the pharmacy. It's awful, awful stuff. But there are some nice non-toxic anti-pigmenting agents that you could use that don't have the same toxicity, and they don't have the same kind of potency as hydroquinone, but they're still somewhat effective. And we could talk about that on another show.
Okay. Well, today we learned a little bit about the different kinds of pigmentation, hyperpigmentation, and the deeper ones lipofuscin. And next time we'll talk a little bit about what we can do maybe immediately with items, food items, or nutrients we find at home, or maybe some people have to go to, what do they call it? Dermatologist. Yeah. So we'll talk about that next time. And in the meantime, thank you so much again, Ben.
Thank you.
We will be connecting soon.
Thanks, Amanda.
Bye.